Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, a huge welcome to everyone who's joined us today. Those who are at Webinar 1, welcome back. Those who didn't manage to make Webinar 1 that have joined us today, a big welcome. I hope you've managed to watch or listen to the online version on YouTube. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Planning Monitor Control SIG and via the letters EV and M. So let's get on to the actual webinar itself. So this is webinar 2 of 3, and if you remember in the first webinar we spent some time with you building on a statement that I had made that EVM is a way of working and not just mathematics and analysis, and we gave you some of the basic building blocks of that. Martin spoke about the synergies between what you might regard as a traditional project control system and a more specific earned value management system and how they work together. We then talked about the importance of a valid baseline in a functioning earned value management system, and we'll talk more about all of these things today. For example, we got asked a number of questions last time about the 32 criteria that Martin and I referenced, and we'll talk about those, not in detail because that will take some time, but we will talk about those. So as I say, today we're going to expand some more. And we're going to look in more detail of what you'd expect to see in an effective earned value management system. And we're going to provide you with some advice on where an E-value is and is not useful to you and how, therefore, you can tailor it to suit your needs. But there's a bit of a warning around that tailoring. Tailoring is not about making your life easy. It's about making earned value management effective for the style and scale and complexity of project you have. So, introductions, with your blessing, I'm not going to repeat the introductions from last time. If you want to know who Martin and I are, listen to the first webinar. Just take it though that between us, Martin and I have nearly 50 years experience in earned value, and we've seen and done a number of things in this area. What I will do, I'll repeat a slight apology from what I made last time, is given the organization I work for, I cannot give you live examples of stuff that I've seen, but I will talk about the style of EV I've seen in the past and what it means and how I think we can improve it. So why these webinars? Just to go very, very quickly over this. I postulated quite a while ago in the Planning Monitor Control SIG that while people understood earned value analysis quite well, very few people understood the system that went underneath that to provide you with the data that you can analyze. This was widely accepted by the SIG, and we said, wouldn't it be a good idea if we can start to talk to people more about the system so people can understand what EV is really about, and therefore you can get more out of the analysis when you do it. So that's just a brief refresher for you. So I mentioned last time what we did. So this time we're going to explain the attributes of an effective EVMS, and we're going to talk about with and without compliance to EIA 748. EIA 748 being the US standard that's applied to EV, and it is a very detailed standard, and we'll go into that a bit more. And in many respects, if you are it's actually a truism. If you are contracted to meet EIA 748, it is an all or nothing standard. And I say with that comes an awful lot of detail and requirements. We will discuss, therefore, also where earned value analysis is beneficial and where not, and how to tailor it. And that's really, really important because you know, if you're not contracted to do EIA 748, but you want to improve your project controls, using EV is a really good step in the right direction. And it's worth me pointing out, actually, Martin and I, in preparing for this particular seminar, webinar, had a conversation last night about some of the experiences we had had. And one of the things we both have seen quite a lot is organizations that have got a project control system in place. They have decided to apply some form of rule of credit, so they can measure where they are. They can measure their earned value on a particular package of work or control account. That gives them the ability to generate the analysis and the mathematics. What we often see is people therefore say, well, I'm doing earned value. In actual fact, what you're doing is earned value analysis. What you don't have underpinning that is an earned value management system. And it's what we're trying to do between Martin and I is sort of lift that level of understanding, saying what earned value is and what earned value management is, should I say, and what earned value analysis is. Just quickly there, next time we'll move on to the assurance reviews, i.e. once you've got an earned value management system in place, how do you assure yourselves that it's going to be good and will continue to be good? So moving on, EIA 748. And Martin and I have caveated this particular section with be careful what you wish for. I've already mentioned that if you are contracted to do 748, it is an all or nothing. So let's quickly move on. We were asked last time to explain what the 32 criteria are. Well, folks, you're in luck. Here they are. So starting on criteria 1, let's get into the detail. No, only kidding, folks, only kidding. These 32 criteria are all backed up with additional information. And I'm just going to give you an example here. This is the NDIA interpretation guide for earned value management. And this is the requirement you will have to meet guideline 10 and 10 alone. If you can multiply that by 32, you'll start to see the level of requirement that it will take to meet EIA 748, exactly. So what we're saying here is be careful what you wish for, because EIA 748 comes with an awful lot of baggage. And depending on the style of your project, some of that will be useful, some of that will not be useful. What this does show, however, is the complexity of what an EVMS will entail. As I say, there's 32 things there. And what you may see when you actually start reading through one or two of these is you'll pick up some of the phraseology and the words that Martin and I were using last time to describe what makes up an effective EVMS, the basics of it. So you'll pick up things like organization, planning, budgeting. But what you'll see here, though, is 32 what look like discrete criteria. So if I go forwards, I just want to provide this witch's warning again. Meeting all 32 criteria to the fullest extent is about as scary and time-consuming and as costly as it looks. So despite the fact that Martin and I are EVM geeks, if I'm allowed to use that phrase, we do not advocate the blind usage of EIA 748 all the time. It is about appropriateness. It's about where it adds value to what you're doing. So what we say here is full compliance really should only ever be undertaken if you are really contracted to do it. Now, obviously, if you have a company that operates EV and operates it really well, and this is your way of business, that may be what you do. You'll get very close to the 32, and that's great, because if you've got a system in place already, it's best to use it. That actually acts as value for money. But putting an EV system in place for the first time is incredibly time consuming. That was one of the questions we had from the last webinar. Martin, what was the answer we gave for how long we think it would take to introduce EV for the first time?
If you start from scratch, you can look at a minimum of probably about 18 months.
There you go. So about 18 months to go from a standing start to a functioning EVMS. And you can imagine the amount of money that takes. So what we're saying is if EVM is warranted, and we think in many contracts and projects it is, then in most cases a pragmatic approach will reap the real benefit without incurring, shall we say, additional costs, i.e. it's that cost benefit analysis that you need to do. And these are the key takeaways from this slide. But Martin and I promised we were going to talk to you about EIA 748 and the 32 criteria, but what we don't want to do is talk to you about the 32 criteria as a set of individual items, because you won't get the picture of how it all knits together. So what we've come across, or you're going to use today, is basically a model. It's a project model that starts at the top with organization, planning and budgeting, and goes round. So it's, the way I look at this particular model, it's a slightly expanded version of the plan, do, review. You plan some work, you do some work, you review it, you might make some changes, and that's got a big risk and opportunity halo around the outside. Martin and I will basically take these bubbles in turn to talk to you a little bit more about them. But I just want to talk to you about webinar 1 very briefly there, and say, remember we used the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, which most people see in earned value, is just in that stage 4. What Martin and I are saying, that whole system in there, those 5 stages, the risk and opportunity management, form the critical foundations of an effective earned value management system. So what we're going to do now is take these bubbles in turn and talk to you about those. So Martin, over to yourself.
Okay, thanks, Scott. As Scott's already mentioned, there are 5 critical foundations. One thing to bear in mind is that it's not a single circular loop, it's a multiple pass through the entire life cycle. The first would be typically for the substantiations, that would eventually lead to the agreement of a baseline. And of course, the second one will be the management of your work thereafter. Hence, it is a circular series of events that will be revisited time after time. The purpose of organization is really to look at the how you organize the work and how you apply or determine the associated resources. You're going to define the work scope, and ideally you want to meet it and possibly even beat it. This is the ask of the customer. You need to identify and assign the responsibilities throughout the structures. You need to be able to substantiate a response that leads into a baseline and any changes that are made to it through time. And then obviously the customer and contractor need to be explicitly on the same page, and this will mitigate any issues downstream where you begin to argue certain points. The how is really where a lot of the work is done in the very first instance. Structures comes to mind first of all. Then here you're looking at product, work, organization, and cost. The product breakdown structure is all about the technical attributes, how you're going to do the work, what technical pieces of work that need to be done in what fashion, in what timeline, etc., etc. What key milestones that you think that you're going to need. The work breakdown structure goes further than the product. It adds to it, if you like. It's a hierarchy of that product, but it includes the services and supports that are going to be required to accomplish that work. It's extended into manageable elements. The OBS, that includes the key role players and specific skills from all the functions that are going to be involved in the work. Remember, that is the PBS and the WBS combined. One that is often not necessarily neglected or perhaps fully understood is the CBS, the cost breakdown structure. Here it's really important to look at this structure right at the very beginning, because it comes down to funding being allocated and the reports that are going to emanate from it or are going to be required from your customer. These are often called contract line items, CLINs. They are essentially reportable elements. Think of those as funding streams. Sometimes they are also referred to as the color of money. The second how is obviously risks. We need to look at mitigated and what's left, the unmitigated. And when we get onto budgets later on, you will see a reference to the PMB and management reserve come into play. Clearly, assumptions and dependencies are very, very important. You need to get these on the table. You need to be able to discuss them. You need to get them agreed as part of the baseline agreement. All of the resources and all of the work that's going to be carried out also need to be qualified in terms of basis of estimates, durations, the resources, the costs. And of course, all of these will have to be used in association with the right rate decks, and we'll talk a little about those a little later. Once you've got all that in place, then the work breakdown structure dictionary, that's the way of disseminating the work from the statement of work through the intermediate WBS nodes and eventually to where the work is going to be owned and controlled, i.e. control accounts. An integrated master schedule, whilst it may not be fully armed in the first instance of stage 1, it will become more and more put together and agreed upon as you go through this stage, and eventually it will form an agreement to the baseline. And then of course, once you've done that, you bring everything together and there is something called a responsibility assignment matrix. That document in its most simplistic form is a WBS and OBS matrix with a single point of ownership. it identifies those people that are responsible for those control accounts. It's good practice to turn that into a costed RAM, because baseline change control can emanate from it. So in stage one, which is the first of the 5 critical elements, you need to understand and play back the ask. You need to set preliminary structures. You need to gather the risks and the assumptions. And then you need to do some estimating, using obviously the right rate decks to gain the budgets, the resources and the time. And then you can use all that information to go into discussion with your customer to substantiate your response, and ultimately gain acceptance to the above as a baseline and begin to run the program. The second of our 2 critical elements is the planning and budgeting. It's probably more understood as a requirement than perhaps a lot of the other 5 critical steps, probably because it's more in your face. People are more in tune to plans and certainly the costings of the resources and the tasks that are put together in those plans. But as I said before, this is a circular process, and everything works together and not as islands. The purpose of this particular stage is to address the integration, interrelationships, and control of scope, schedule, funding, and budget. Account for future expected efficiencies, and that can be technological, it can be processes, it can be tool sets, etc. The IMS and resource availabilities come into play here, obviously, because as I said in the first step, now you're beginning to firm up the IMS as you go through this discussion point, and eventually, in association with that, your performance measurement baseline will suddenly begin to light up. Your unmitigated risk will give you an argument for your level of management reserve that you may require. And if you're in the EIA 748 world, then there's something called undistributed budget. I'm deliberately not going to talk around that particular topic here. It's a bit involved, but for those of you that are thinking of going down the route of EIA 748, then UB is something that you really need to read up on and fully understand before you go much further. Scott mentioned taking objective performance earlier. Earned value techniques are the way of dealing with that. It's how you intend to claim performance through time of activities. They are called EVTs. The selection of these and the associated QBDs, quantified backup data, sets the standard from which you will form part of your discussion with your customer for the baseline. And it will also help you with your performance reporting and your variance analysis reports downstream. All of these have to be selected with good rules behind them, good reasons behind them at this stage. How do we do this? Well, the OMS from stage 1 is going to be honed from its initial perspective. This will require updates to the associated documents, and those will include risks, assumptions, dependencies, basis of estimates, control account authorizations, the RAM, etc. Final reviews of resources and applied rate decks for those resources. Bear in mind that when we talk rate decks, predominantly direct rates, obviously, but if we are required to report in customer currency as a price, then we obviously need to include the indirect rates as well. And lastly, as I've said, we want to set the EVTs and QBDs. The aim of this particular step is to align the customer ask, the scope, to the proposed schedule, resource, and budget. Agree the remaining unmitigated risks in terms of potential timing and their cost. We need to finalize and understand the to be submitted IMS, your integrated master schedule, the performance measurement baseline, and any level of management reserve that you feel is warranted to be associated with your unmitigated risks. We need to ensure that all necessary resources, and that is both man and machine, You would have heard me in the previous webinar. It's not just the manpower resources that we're talking of here. We're actually talking of non-manpower, all of the tools, all of the special equipment, all of the infrastructure like test beds, if you like, that you're going to need to satisfy the scope. All of those need to be assured to become available when required. We've mentioned EVTs and QBDs. Those obviously need to be set here. Equally, we need to agree and set variance thresholds. The main reason for this here is that when we eventually get into our monthly program reviews and we need to answer variance analysis reports, some of our work breakdown structures are going to be very, very wide and very deep. And what we don't want, or indeed have the time to cater for, is everybody in that room going through their own pitch. We want to be able to manage by exception, and variance thresholds allow you to do that. We obviously need to gain the customer acceptance to the baseline, and once we've got that, then we can enable the work through the authorizations, and away you go. A reminder here is, for this particular stage, is that the debate through substantiation and approximately agree the baseline is obviously the first part of this step, and then to update and manage through baseline change control thereafter. Next slide, please, Scott. The third one I'm going to talk about is accounting. When I mention this topic, people often let their minds drift to traditional accounting. It is part of that, but it's not the predominant part. The purpose here is at the point of baseline and thereafter, we have to match funding to budgets. There has to be an ability for collection of all labor and non-labor costs. These have to be by resource type through charge numbers that are assigned within the control account. And then, of course, costs need to be summarized vertically through the work breakdown structure, and in some cases, the organizational breakdown structure also. EIA 748 will, if you're contracted to that, then normally there will be a level of your work breakdown structure that will be dictated to you. Normally that sits in the level 3, level 4 of your WBS. But of course, our internal work breakdown structures will go a lot deeper than that. So if you have a project control system, then you can do some tailoring along the way. The how is through time booking facility. The application and use of both direct and indirect rate decks, the charge number allocations, and then really importantly here is that there has to be a drumbeat to the process of getting to your end of month numbers. This process is not just individuals, but also how individuals interact with each other, and it's very important that you set this drumbeat, you understand it, and you drive the compliance to it through time. Accruals is very clearly an accounting term. Normally accruals are made when end of year books need to be settled, or it could be that actuals are actually to be placed in the cost collection system. However, in earned value management, it is that, plus there is the need for an ability to use something called estimated actuals. For those of you who have not come across this before, this is typically where a cost is not yet seen in your system, and yet you know the work has been done. You want to be able to use a purchase order value or an estimated value that you know will typically end up in your cost collection system at some point. And the reason for doing that is that you don't want to be in a position of reporting positive false cost variances. The last thing on the how is that you need to allow for past reporting errors to be corrected. Now, these shouldn't happen very often, and if they do, they should only be done for big events. And if they do come along, then normally they are viewed upon as being serious and not something that you would want to make certainly routine. The aim of all of this is to provide accurate, meaningful cost performance information into the reporting formats. not least the Format 5, which will be talked about later, which is the variance analysis report, and also into the monthly program review. We need to provide accurate, substantiated forecasts. These forecasts need to be time-phased and cumulative. And all of this goes on to allow for informed decisions. Now, one note on this to bear in mind is that if you are contracted to 748, then this whole raft of additional requirements will need fulfilling. Scott already mentioned this. The thing to bear in mind is that those fall into the categories typically of development and production parks cost, unit and lot costs, recurring and non-recurring, and then overhead management, etc., etc. Again, going back to the theme, be careful what you wish for. EI 748 isn't a nice to have. It isn't the ability to cherry pick. You have to follow all of the expectations. Much better if you can use a project control system. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Martin. So I'm going to move on then to stage 4, which is analysis. So having set up your project using the organizational constructs that Martin's talked about, having planned it, having budgeted it in stage 2, having done some work and then accounted for that work in stage 3, it's time now to do some maths. It's time to dive in and start talking about SPI and CPI, because that's what we do. That's the good stuff, isn't it? It's the, I know I'm ahead of schedule, I know I'm behind schedule, I'm over budget here. But in reality, it's much, much more than that. SPI and CPI, schedule variance, cost variance, what they're really good at is telling you where to look. Because in the end of the day, the analysis is there to help you focus and make the right decisions for your project. So it's about actually really understanding what's driving the CPI low, what's really driving your cost overrun or whatever it may be. So it's about the analysis that goes with it. And it's about, and I'm just going to show you here something called a VAR 5 or a CPR 5. It's one of the standardized reports for own value. What Martin and I really advocate is this is potentially the most important monthly report a project can have, because it goes beyond the maths and it starts to talk about why do I have a variance? What's the cause of it? What is the impact of the variance on my cost and my schedule? And most importantly, perhaps, is what am I going to do about it? And these reports, by the way, are notoriously difficult to do and do well. I recently had the pleasure of working with an American colleague who has been doing he thinks for well over 40 years, and I can believe it. And he was saying that in all his time, he has never seen what he would regard as a perfect variance report. They are notoriously difficult, but they are absolutely important, because that's the bit that tells me what decisions I need to make. So if I just go back to this slide now. So where we do their analysis using the full EV set of data that Martin's talked about, which is collected in the drumbeat, is in traditionally your monthly performance reporting meetings. And these meetings are quite key. We've put in here, there's a few things about this meeting that are quite important to us in terms of earned value. Standardizing the agenda, why do we want to do that? Quite frankly, because there's nowhere to hide. If we standardize the agenda and we have a set way of doing this meeting, then it becomes more difficult for someone to say, don't look over here this month because there's nothing to see. It also allows us to, and you'll hear this word from me quite a lot over the next couple of minutes, it allows us to talk about trend analysis. If I'm standardizing the way I collect my data and what I do with that data each month, I can start to build a picture of trend analysis. I think I mentioned this in webinar 1. What that enables me to do, and the real power of earned value, is to start looking forwards. Where is my project going to outturn? What's my estimate at completion? So standardize also standardize my attendees. Why would I want to do that? Well, there's an important thing in this one, is the attendees at these monthly performance review meetings must be delegated to make the decisions required to take the project forwards. So if you standardize them, they will once again have the history. They will once again understand the trends. There's a key point here though, and this is something Martin and I are both quite passionate about with earned value. The attendees must all understand earned value management and earned value analysis. It's very, very easy for people to get distracted by the vast array of data you can show someone with earned value, and it's also quite easy for project managers, shall we say, to I don't want to use the word pull the wool over your eyes, but basically to deflect attention perhaps from where it should be. So if the attendees, the people helping make these decisions, are all aware of what the data means and how to interpret it, they can all add a great deal more value. And that's another reason why you want them standardized, because not everyone can understand earned value in an organization. Standardized data packs, that speaks for itself. I think I've talked to you, about the sort of the trend analysis, but it also brings familiarity. If you know that you're going to get something called a CPR1, a CPR3, and a CPR5, these are 3 standardized reports, you can start to interpret them really quickly. You can glance at them and go, actually, I know where I want to look. Once again, trend analysis gives you that ability. And the other one is standardized duration. Now, Martin and I, was another conversation we've had. We're quite passionate about this because Martin talked earlier about EV gives the ability to talk about everything should you want to. But the key to these meetings is understanding what you actually need to talk about. And I revert back to what I said before about SPI and CPI. They are excellent, actually not just SPI and CPI, but schedule variance and cost variance as well, CV and SV. They are excellent at helping you point towards where you need to look. What they can't tell you is what the problem is. They just say, you might wish to look here. And noting, of course, that earned value, then you start to bring in things like critical path, because it could be behind schedule but off the critical path, and you decide you don't want to look at it. And if you constrain the duration of your meeting to something sensible, of course, it enables you to get that real focus on what you actually need to look at each month, rather than dilly-dally a little bit on the data. So the next bullet point there is, I've already talked about, really, it's management by exception. Martin's already talked about the concept of thresholds. So often you'll see in an organization, and I hate to use this example, but you'll see something like an SPI or CPI of less than 0.95, therefore you need to talk about it. So it becomes an exception, that threshold, or maybe of greater than plus 0.1.1. Now, I just want to raise again the danger of using SPI and CPI only, because it could be a tiny control account which has got a off the critical path that's got a low SPI, and you end up, if you blindly use these thresholds, you end up talking about stuff once again you don't need to talk about. So this is just a way of saying again that the mathematics is just the bit that helps you do the analysis. It isn't the analysis itself. So management by exception means finding those things that really matter to the outcomes of your project, understanding the cause, understanding what you're going to do about it, and then actually, shall we say, implementing those actions, making them actually happen. The next bullet point there, risk and management reserve burn down. This is critical, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next section, which is change management. But given that we talked, I think, in the first webinar, that control accounts, or what I give to someone to do the work is precisely the work they say they're going to do. So I give someone a budget to do the work they say they're going to do. If there's risks in that work and they are planning to do some mitigation actions, I'll give them the budget to do those mitigation actions. If we've agreed that they won't do those mitigation actions just yet, then that particular part of the budget will stick in the management reserve. The control account manager may come to me at a later date and go, boss, I really need that budget now because I want to mitigate this risk. Via change, I can then put money into that particular control account and their baseline. And we need to monitor that reserve burn down, because one of the beauties of that particular system, where you've got that tight control across that boundary between PMB and management reserve, it gives me the ability to understand how quick I'm burning my risk. And therefore, if I'm halfway through a project and I've burnt 75% of my risk, I know perhaps that I'm in trouble and I need to do something about it. I perhaps need to look for opportunities. And the final bullet point of this slide I wanted to talk about was BAC and EAC. BAC is budget at completion, what I said my project was going to cost, and the EAC is estimate at completion. And Martin's going to talk to you a little bit more about EAC on some later slides. But it's where I think or calculate I'm going to outturn. But the EAC, one of the keys to it is it should be evidence-based. I should be able to justify why I, as a project manager, am saying I'm going to outturn at this particular point. Now, the beauty of these is, once again, is that gives me that ability to look ahead in a standardized way that allows me to make decisions based around where I think I'm going, not where I think I've been. And the other thing about EV is, because of the way it works, it tends to be a really good early warning system. you'll get examples where a control account or particular package of work will go off piste, as it were, and EV will highlight that really early. And although sometimes it's difficult, it's then having the courage to make some of those early decisions about what are you going to do about that. So that's analysis. I just want to emphasize the mathematics, the bit that we all tend to get excited about, is just the start. It's just the bit that helps me know where to look. And even then, as I said before, it doesn't tell me everything, because I may have a control account that is small and off the critical path that I'm happy for it to be lagging at this particular time, or even slightly over budget. The next stage then is change. And there's really two bits I want to talk about change in respect of earned value. The first one is really about the importance of the baseline in earned value. And Martin and I have stressed this over and over and over again in the 2 webinars to date. It is absolutely critical that you have a valid baseline, because that, after all, is what you're measuring your performance against. And if the baseline isn't valid, it is effectively disguising your performance. So change is fundamental to maintaining that baseline. The other one is, and it's that first bullet point there, risks, opportunities, and issues. And I covered this before in the previous slide. If you remember from webinar 1, we said you have this thing called contract budgeted baseline that effectively is my PMB, what I set out the scope of work I'm going to do is going to cost, plus my MR. And there is a boundary between those two things. And that boundary is controlled by the change process. And it's absolutely fundamental that we can do that. And it's a key part, I think, that that earned value has brought to better project discipline, even to normal project control systems in that respect. Another key element I just wanted to discuss is with earned value, and in particular, once again, if you're following an EIA 748, there's a golden rule, as it were, that we don't retrospectively make change. So if I know I made a mistake in a control account 2 months ago, I actually make the change this month, not from 2 months ago. What this enables me to say is last month's cumulative data plus this month's in period data, by definition, must equal this month's cumulative data. If it doesn't, I can then go to my change log and say, is there any change? If I then add change into that, that picture must always equal. So what I'll just go back over that again. In actual fact, it's last month's cumulative data plus this month's actuals plus change must equal this month's cumulative data is the actual final picture. And that's really, really important, because once again, EV gives you that information. It gives you CPR3, for example, is a standardized report that gives you that information. I don't want to talk too much about change management. It's something we probably all know a lot about. It's just so fundamentally important in earned value management. I'm going to move on. Time is actually rushing on, and Martin and I were quite concerned about the timing of this particular webinar. So I just want to say a couple of things here. Having said all of this, the implementation of earned value management into an organization that has yet to use it will be a significant transformation program. Martin and I said earlier, it's about 18 months, and it's all about hearts and minds. Anyone, should I say, or any organization can implement new process, new tool sets. That's the easy bit. It's doing it really, really well. So it's about senior leadership really buying into it and using it effectively. One thing, for example, I would say, because earned value is a good early warning system, it's very easy to shoot the messenger when they're saying, I need some help. A control account manager may come to the project manager and go, boss, look, I'm going off track really early here. Can I have some help? And if they get shot, next month they'll pull up the drawbridge and won't tell you, because they will find ways of disguising their data. Communications, behaviors, we know all about that. The next bullet point I really ought to talk about here is capability capacity. And it's something that Martin and I are quite passionate about. You need SQEP people to operate an earned value management system. They need to really understand it. Sorry, I use a phrase I use at work, SQEP, suitably qualified and experienced personnel. You need good people that really know their stuff, which requires training and mentoring. And the final piece there is about, once you've got a system in place, is assurance. And we'll go into that in substantially more detail the next webinar. Sorry, I did rush through that slide a little bit because we are moving forward on time. What I'm going to do now is just very briefly talk about earned value types and rules of credit that Martin mentioned earlier. So what is an EVT, or a rule of credit? Effectively, they are predefined ways in which you measure progress in your project, and you need to apply them at a sensible level, whether it be a work package, a control account, or whatever that may be. And earned value itself allows this set here. So you can see there's a number of, I'm not going to go into these in any detail, but the point of an earned value type or a rule of credit is it defines in advance the way you measure progress. And it also, I just want to bring up the word quantifiable backup data on the right-hand side of the screen here. It defines not only how you measure the progress, but also how you prove that progress has been made. What is your data that demonstrates you are where you say you are? So it becomes very evidence-based. And in particular, some of this is you can look at some of these, go objective percent complete. How is that estimated percent complete? How is that evidence based? And these are really important part of earned value management, because they perform a critical part of the credibility of the data that's been collected each month, and they've got to be repeatable. I just wanted to flip this table around a bit, because the first version you saw, there's the one you would normally see. This version talks about the increasing importance of QBD. And because QBD is the bit that really provides the evidence that you are actually where you say you are. And what you want is, you don't want too much reliance on QBD. You want to actually have the facts there, as it were. So 0-100, for example, is I've either done it or I haven't. So I've met the milestone or I haven't met the milestone, for example. And I just wanted to raise this because these are the only allowable earned value types, rules of credit in the earned value management system, and they are fundamental to our successful system. The final point I wanted to make about this slide is the level of effort. Level of effort is designed for management activity. It doesn't actually progress the project in any way. And if you allow it to, it can end up swamping the project and distorting the data. So you want to minimize this to about between 5 and 15% of the total budget of your project. And so otherwise, when you start to roll the data up, it will distort it. That, folks, was a really quick hop, skip, and a jump through that, and I do apologize. But I'm going to hand over to Martin now, who's going to talk to you about the magic.
Right. It's important to reiterate that without the 5 steps being in place and continually adhered to, then everything we've talked around so far, with all the analysis that may come from it, that EVA data will be worthless. Worse than that, it will become a cost burden. Unfortunately, even today, most people, organizations, when you discuss EVA, as Scott mentioned previously, is that the stereotypical response is that it's going to be all about the budgeted cost of work scheduled, the budgeted cost of work performed, and the actual cost of work performed. And then if you're lucky, you will obviously get your SPI and CPI calculations. And if you're really lucky, you may even get cost and schedule variance. But normally, for lots of organizations, other than those that are driven by 748, that's about as far as it goes. And there's really so much more that you can do. In fact, you should do. All of these indices, by the way, that I've mentioned, they're all rearward looking. The real power of earned value is to look forward and to show where you're heading. It's interesting that, we said it before, we're going to say it once again, the project control system, if it's adequate and in place, it will provide all of these numbers for you. It will be able to substantiate these numbers for you. You don't need a fully compliant earned value management system. Again, be careful what you wish for. In a minute, I'm going to go to a chart and just walk you through it, try and put this in perspective. Some takeaways, however, before we go in that far, is that it's all about compliance to your system descriptions, your project control system or your EVMS, and using the plethora of detailed information that emanates from it in a pragmatic way. But compliance does not have to mean 748. It's not about SPI and CPI. It's not about pure EVA metrics. You should use everything around you to make informed decisions through management exception via thresholds. So bear with me on this one. We're going to move through it quite quickly, but hopefully it has set the scene. So we've got a scenario here. It's a 10-month project. We're 40% the way through it. And our EAC is going to show in a minute that we're running late and there's a cost overrun. So now we're going to add in, it's a 12-month period, and we've got some numbers ranging up to £400,000 in this case as our axes. We've used our processes, our critical stages, we've planned our work, and we've got our time phase budget, our BCWS, and we've got our cumulative value, our BAC. We're in month 4, as we said, and we're beginning to collect costs through those first 4 months. And right now, we can see that the work that we've been able to achieve is far less than what we planned. You can see that by the red line below the blue. Equally, the cost of that work shown in red is far more expensive than we planned as well. So today's picture is not particularly rosy. If we do the simple maths and we migrate to what everybody loves, SPI and CPI, then if you didn't have the context and you didn't have the axes, then SPI and CPI could mean anything to all men. The best you could probably take away from it is that right now this project is only 44% efficient on schedule. And it's even worse on cost. It's only showing 27%. Next one, please, Scott. If we do go the extra mile in this particular case, then we turn it into pound notes or any currency that you have to use. Then schedule and cost variance begins to put a little bit more context. You can now see how much pain you're in. That 44% efficiency you saw on schedule really means that you are £90,000 behind on work that you should have done, and you are £190,000 over on what you expected it to cost to date. If I go a bit further, and now I'm looking at predictions, because everything we spoke around so far is history, it's done and dusted. If I draw a horizontal line back from BCWP to where it meets BCWS, you can see that we're a little over 2 months late in schedule. Just an indication as to the scale of the problem. As a good CAM or a program manager, I've now diligently looked at the future work, and you can see in the black dotted line, I've looked at those remaining tasks, I've looked at the resources, I've looked at the rate decks applied to those resources, and I've come up with an indication that the work is going to take a little longer than I expected, than I baselined, and it's certainly going to cost a little bit more. And if I start putting more meat on the bones here again, then I can see that my estimated duration, and this will be borne out by your integrated master schedule forecast, by the way, and not in earned value metrics, we can see that the overrun, although it's a little better, we're still going to come in 2 months late. The really important one here, though, is that the variance at completion, the difference between what you had baselined and what your current estimate of completion is that you're going to see, you're predicting a further £80,000 increase. However, if you've got all of the steps in place and you are following this diligently and you're using this information, then you can really begin to use the power of earned value. The 2 complete performance index relative to the EAC takes the current budget, subtracts the work that you've done already and claimed, it divides by your current EAC, predicted EAC value, minus the actual costs that have been collected to date. And it gives you an answer, in this particular cartoon, 1.92. Now, what that is telling you is that between time now, or month 4, 40% through our baseline program of work, we have to become 92% more efficient, even to reach our predicted increased EAC. Further to that, if you're in the world of EIA 748, there are a number of independent EAC calculations. I'm not going to go through those in detail right now, but on average for this cartoon, it will suggest that your EAC is not going to be your budget of around 300,000. It's not even going to be 380,000 as your current EAC is predicted. It suggests that it could be as high as 500,000. So the question here for your control account manager who presents this kind of data, or your program manager that rolls it up and presents it to the customer, is where's the magic going to happen? The value of having the steps that we spoke about 1 through 5 is the fact that you will have substantiated information at hand to be able to answer that fundamental question. And that is the power of earned value. But again, you can still get that level of fidelity through a project control system without the pains and and whistles you have to comply with in 748. Tailoring earned value. So first thing to bear in mind, first thing to note, if you are contracted to 748, there is little or zero ability to tailor. The intent guide, as Scott has already showed you earlier in Rule 10, the old adage, rules is rules, couldn't be more true in 748. However, if you operate a project control system, then tailoring is not only permissible, but it's recommended. You have to match it to complexity, risk, budget, etc. of the project or program in hand. Can you go to the next slide, please, Scott? Right, so very quickly, it's a little bit busy here. If you look left to right here, you'll see business as usual going through in-service production and new product introduction. And conversely, you will see level 1 going to level 4 running right to left. We have to be able to disseminate between business as usual and the other three. Business as usual is routine, it's standardized operation and reporting. It's how about your business ticks, the information required to routinely report that performance. It's low risk, low budgets compared to project and programs generally. Low resource levels also, largely employed within operating standard processes, gathering of minimal information and reporting. And generally it's annualized workflow, whereas a project or program can go over many years. The answer to that outcome of that is that it requires low, or at best low, IMS and EVA data. EVA is only to be used when it should, if you are going to use it in this type of work, then it should be minimal. SPI, CPI, and SV and CV, rather than the full bells and whistles that perhaps I've shown you in that cartoon. The MPI, production and in service, then the chart shows that in a new product introduction, then it's going to be a high level of compliance. And you can see that in the narrative under the requirements, if you like, under the chart of level 1. When you move into production, then typically it sits in the high to medium, and then in service it becomes medium. The points to take away from this chart, I'm deliberate being quick here as I'm cognizant of the time. The points to take away here is that tailoring is not a science, but there are a few guidelines. Look at the chart above, and you can make your own mind up on where you think you need to sit to help you with your projects and programs, and also business as usual. There is a SQEP, suitably qualified, experienced personnel growth path on this chart. It ranges from people that are operating in the business as usual world through to the high-end new product introduction. Standardization of processes, roles, data, tools, training, and assurance we'll cover in webinar 3, are crucial to this. And then lastly, functional alignment. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Not exceptionally, but typically those functions that cause the most problems will be program management, engineering, finance, and commercial. It's really beneficial for your processes, your system, your level of assurance to make sure that all of those areas are on the same page and operate in a uniform way.
Thank you, Martin. So just quickly before we go to a few minutes of questions, Martin and I have mentioned today a number of times something called the intent guide. This is a document, it's readily available on the internet. It's made by the NDIA, the National Defense Industrial Association in the USA. If you Google NDIA Earned Value Management System Intent Guide, you'll find it straight away. It's the document that we showed some of a couple of slides from. It also has a more comprehensive version of the project control cycle that Martin and I showed, which shows you exactly where each of those 32 guidelines fit in the project control cycle. So if you have detailed questions and thoughts about EV, I mean, feel free to contact Martin and I, but this is a great document for you to download and have a look at. So folks, questions. Let's spend a couple of minutes, and I do apologize a bit. We have downloaded an enormous amount of information on you in a short space of time, and we weren't kidding when we said that it would take us, a good week or so to go through this in detail. So let's have a look at some of the questions. Stage 4. Yes, it says here stage 4 is one of the key points. The numbers are there to direct you to where the attention is required. Absolutely correct. That's all they can really do. They can tell you how bad it might be, but it doesn't tell you what to do or what what might be causing the problem. So the numbers, SPI, CPI, schedule variance, cost variance, etc., are pointers. That's a really good call. So another comment here, it's actually more of a comment, trend analysis, good analytical tool, helps catch the falling ball. Absolutely right. Martin and I have mentioned that earned value, I think we mentioned this on the first webinar, earned value is not necessarily a good thing for small projects on the basis that it does cost money to deliver. So it's really good on those longer projects, more expensive ones as well, where you'll build up that really good wealth of trend analysis.
We've got one that's just come in on do we recommend qualifications or experience? I guess my answer to that is that you won't get that detailed level of experience or knowledge base through traditional exams. What you will do is that you will build up that experience through actually doing this. If you're fortunate or unfortunate, whichever way you look at it, to work with the DoD, then this will be thrust on you. And I'm sure there's a few people on the line right now that are listening to this, and they will have learned through experience. The rest of you, if you've really got issues with this topic and you really need some hand, then my recommendation is that not to rely on qualifications, but to talk to people that have been there and done it. They will give you the shortcuts, they will give you the experience, and they will also offer you a helping hand along the way.
And folks, that is exactly half past, and I do apologize a bit for the rush through. Martin and I knew this one was going to be an intense set of data we were giving you, and feel free to contact us. Thank you.